invite you to please locate the Torah volumes from your seat racks. The large volume. Page 912. We are in the middle of Sefer Vayikra, known in English as the Book of Leviticus. And it is also called, Leviticus is also called Torah HaKohanim, which means the Torah or the teaching of the priesthood. And we are very concerned here with all of the rituals of ancient Israel. There are also, as we learned in the last few weeks, very important ethical principles embedded in these teachings. Ritual was not an end in itself, but always a means to something higher. And so it is with this week's Torah portion, that there is a decidedly higher end, actually quite a few of them, to what look like somewhat arcane and kind of very nitpicky kind of requirements for the conduct of the priests. Very, very down into the details. And I would say that it has to do with something that we are learning all too well in our own day. And that is that leaders must hold themselves and be held to very high standards. Talmud says that as goes the leader, so goes the generation. And I fear that in our own world, that generation is in degeneration, because our leaders are not rising to the highest of what they're capable of, not thinking about their responsibilities in service of the people sufficiently, of all their people, and the result therein is a lowering of standards. And I fear for, and I'm sure many of you do too, for the quality of life of our country in the years ahead as a result. The second, or the latter part of this week's Torah portion, has the most ancient Jewish festival calendar in chapter 23. And actually, I'd like to invite you to turn there for a moment. To page 927. There are many higher purposes involved in the calendar, but there's something here that I think one would miss were it not for an understanding of the Hebrew. It begins in verse 2 saying, "Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, these are my fixed times, the fixed times of God, which you shall proclaim as sacred occasions." So here we have the enumeration of the holy days of ancient Israel. And I don't imagine that most of us would ever be able to come up with the derivation, the source of the conceptual source of the word for festival or holy day that appears here in the Torah. The word in Hebrew is moed. And I invite you to imagine, you can say out loud if you like, what you think the derivation of the word for holy day is in the ancient Hebrew. Anyone have a thought? What's the basic concept that underlies the concept of a holy day? Anyone? The Hebrew word is moed, and the root is vav ayin daled. And a va'ad is a committee. A ve'idah is a conference. It means a meeting. What kind of meeting? Well, think about it. The festivals that we have, the holidays we have, the Jewish community just finished celebrating Pesach, Passover. And it was this great family gathering. It's a time when we come together from near and far, and it's this beautiful time to be together. So too, Shabbat here in this synagogue is a time of gathering, the gathering of community. After a long week of work, to be together with friends, with people who care about you, whom you care about. A time of joy and celebration. And is that what it's all about? The sacred occasions that we bring together people? Well, maybe and maybe not. Because I think that also the encounter that we're talking about is the encounter between people and God. And how does it happen? I don't think it's that in ancient Israel they had God locked up in the temple, and that you came to the temple on the holy day in order to draw close to God. Maybe some people thought that. But I think, especially as we think about things in modern times, that it's when we come close to each other that we come close to God. I'd like you to think about that. It's in the meeting and encounter of people that we draw close to God. And I think that there's really a great big idea and a very important lesson here. We've been busy dividing the world up into us and them. But in the grand spiritual scheme of things, certainly is understood by the great Hebrew heritage. There is no us and them. There's only us. And we find God not when we slice and dice the world into little sects and little corners and little tribes, but we find God in the great gathering of people where the image of God is present in them. And when we see the image of God in one another, and we feel close and loving to each other, that's when the presence of God is most manifest. There was in the great temple in Jerusalem a number of different courts. The inner chamber, as we learn here in this week's Torah portion in the Haftarah, is a place where only the priests would enter. And then there were a place where only Israelite men would enter. And then there was a place where women would enter. And then there was a place where Gentiles would gather. Turns out that in ancient Israel, it was the United Nations, in the best sense of the term, that people would come together from near and far to be close to God. And I'd like to suggest to you that this is a paradigm that's possible and indeed desirable in our own day. That we draw people together, that we understand that that which unites us is so much more fundamental than that which divides us. That all of us are God's children, that all of us are one human family created in the image of God, and that if we want to feel close to God and to have God manifest to us in our world, it will be through gathering, embracing, and loving one another. We read now from Parshat Emor. We'll go back to page 912.